Yes, that's awesome. No, I appreciate it.
Let's see what happens. No one listens to me. Don't listen to me. You guys listen to each other. No one listens to me. Get accused of speaking yourself. Sunset? Yeah, it's a Friday sunset to sunset. So 2 days. Wow. It's a lunar it's not a solar.
Yeah, there may be a second. Yeah. to call the September 5th, 2023 meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Here.
Mrs. Sachs?
Here.
Mr. Cooney?
Here.
Mrs. Weiss?
Here.
Mr. Rock?
Here.
Ms. Marshall?
Here.
Ms. Weiser? Here.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item is the reading and disposal of the journal. We have several sets of minutes to address. The first is a set of minutes, regular meeting of June 5, 2023. Are there any additions or changes? If not, is there a motion? Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you. The minutes were fine. My name is spelled different ways, so.
We'll correct that.
Which is difficult. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that should be made consistent then before we, as we finalize those minutes or pending name correction. Is there a motion to approve the June 5, 2023 minutes with the change of correcting the spelling consistently throughout of council member Sachs?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Sachs. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Marshall. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser? Abstain.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. There is the matter of the minutes of June 20th, 2023. I understand those are still being worked on. I would ask for a motion to table.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Cooney, second by Mr. Rock. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser? Abstain.
Very good. Motion carries. Next, there is a set of minutes for the special meeting of June 26, 2023. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion to approve minutes by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Sachs. Any discussion?
Mayor, could you just double check if it was the 26th? I thought we had to cancel that one and change the date.
Is that right?
I don't, without me having my
No,
laptop.
I think it was the 28th.
I'll double check the
I
date.
said 20.
Did the minutes say the 26th or the 28th, do you know? We'll double check. We'll double check the date.
Oh,
It is the 28th,
it
yeah.
is the 28th. Yes, I think that's right. Okay. All right, can we amend the motion then to reflect the 28th? Mrs. Weiss? Okay. All right, so the motion is amended to, who seconded that motion?
Mrs. Sachs?
Mrs. Sachs did. Okay, so Mrs. Sachs, you agree with the amendment?
I do.
All right, so we've approved, we have an amended motion to approve the minutes of June 28th, 26th special meeting. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Abstain.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Abstain.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Abstain. Okay, motion carries. Regarding the special meeting of July 10, 2023, is there a motion regarding those minutes?
So moved, Mayor.
A motion approved by Mr. Rock. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. King. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Abstain.
Mrs. Weiss?
Same.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Next is the special meeting of August 15, 2023. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A motion to approve the minutes by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by, okay, second by Mrs. Sachs. Any discussion on this motion?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Ms. Wise.
I would ask that it be noted under item C, ordinance 2023-40, that I stated I am not in favor of someone from outside the city being appointed due to the unique nature of University Heights. An outside person would not have this knowledge.
Okay. Mrs. Thomas, did you get that change?
Yes, I'm getting it.
Okay, very good. So with that change, any further discussion or changes? On the motion with that change, Mrs. Thomas, do you call the roll?
Mr. King,
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs,
Aye.
Mr. Cooney,
Abstain.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Ms. Marshall,
Aye.
Ms. Weiser.
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Next item is the additions and removals from the agenda and referrals to committee. Are there any additions, removals, or referrals this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to comments from the audience. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. If you wish to address the city this evening, please come on up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and you may take up to 5 minutes to address the city. Seeing no comments, we will then move to reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action thereon. We've had a busy summer here at the city since the last regular meeting of June 20th, 2023. In the interest of time, this mayor's report is not going to be a comprehensive back-to-school essay on what we did last summer, but there is still much to cover. On June 28th, we began installing the new city signs at the primary and secondary city gateways. These signs bear the Mosaic branding. These signs having been designed in 2019, shortly after we developed and began implementing the Mosaic brand in 2018, my first year in office. The Priority 1 signage program is nearly complete, with 2 gateway signs left to install, the rest of the Walter Stinson Community Park signage to install on the west end of the park, and a punch list of items relating to the installation and placement. From residents and visitors, we've had nothing but positive response to the signs, their design, their fabrication, and their installation. The renewed sense of civic pride is palpable. We look forward to the development of the next phase of the program, which will include new signage for City Hall and Purvis Park, among other wayfinding and placemaking signs. The city has created a new position, front desk receptions, and posted it on the city website. The job posting ran in Sunday's Plain Dealer, will appear in the Sun Press this Thursday. It is online in the Cleveland.com classifieds, and the job posting has also been shared on LinkedIn. This is a new position that replaces and incorporates the duties of the phone operator. This position will be in administration rather than in the service department. I would like to take this time to thank our service department colleagues and Laborers 860 who worked with the administration collaboratively on an MOU to allow us to reimagine the former phone operator position as a new position that works in administration. The front desk receptionist will answer the main phone line, direct callers to the departments that may assist them, greet visitors to City Hall, among other responsibilities. This person will be the first person they see when visitors enter the City Hall building. The successful applicant will be personable, friendly, and have strong customer service skills. I'm sharing this tonight for several reasons. First, to keep you apprised. We serve our constituents better with a live person answering calls. We do not expect every caller to know what department in the city can best assist them, and Phone Tree cannot provide the assistance that a live person can. Second, having someone whose job it is to receive visitors to the building is essential in how City Hall receives visitors during regular business hours. For more information, visit the employment page on the city's website. We will accept and consider applications until the position is filled. On July 25th, 2023, I delivered a memo to City Council and all department heads regarding Joe Chuney and GPD's notice of intention to terminate contract. As we've not had regular meetings since that time, I present this for the record tonight. On Monday, July 24, 2023, I met with Joe Chuney and Mo Darwish of GPD Group. Attached to this line, a letter hand-delivered by Joe Chuney and GPD at that meeting. As we'll see from their letter, it is a notice of intention to terminate contract or renewal of professional services agreement with GPD. Either Mr. Chuney or GPD Group will be returning to University Heights in 2024. As set forth in the letter, and similar to former Service Director Jeff Performan's departure, Mr. Chuney and GPD will not be attending any further City Council meetings through the end of this year, although he's not here this evening. As Mr. Chuney's stipend was in substantial part to cover his attendance, he will be foregoing his stipend from the new pay period, this is dated July 25, 2023, through the end of the existing contract. In discussion with Mr. Chuney and Mr. Darwish at the July 24 meeting, while Mr. Chuney was looking to limit his work overall with an eye towards retirement, none of the engineers at GPD are interested in taking on University Heights as a client. Their disinterest is a direct consequence of two key developments. First, City Council members, John Rock and Michelle Weiss in particular, disrespectfully and unprofessional treatment of GPD's professionals at City Council meetings on the facilities and projects these last 2 years. These meetings are recorded and their conduct verifiable. Further insults were reserved for unreported closed-door working group meetings throughout 2022, led by Michelle Weiss and John Rock with Mr. Chuney, Rick Brenner, Steve Wertheim, and me. The indignities inflicted by Rock and Weiss upon Mr. Chuney, impugning his integrity throughout those meetings, were demeaning and ultimately became outrageous and intolerable. This is carried over into what was then the even most recent special meeting of council in Mr. Rock's behavior towards Mr. Chuney. In short, GPD engineers are not interested in working here under these conditions. Second, City Council's passage of Ordinance 2023-07. As I stated in my Mayor's Report of March 8, 2023, this ordinance profoundly changed the position of city engineer from a provider of engineering services to a manager of engineering services. Mr. Chuney stated on the record of the February 6, 2023 meeting that he would resign immediately if this ordinance were passed. In response, the City Council nevertheless passed the ordinance, merely amending the effective date of the ordinance as to the city engineer to December 31, 2023. Accordingly, when I issued on behalf of the city the request for qualifications for city engineer for 2024, Mr. Chuney and GPD have confirmed that they will not be bidding. They will leave at year's end, coinciding with the effective date of the ordinance. This ends the city's 45-year relationship with GPD and its predecessor engineering firm, and all the institutional knowledge of our city's infrastructure that goes with it. The unnecessary and avoidable disruption by our Weiss-Rock-controlled City Council puts into jeopardy the timely completion of several projects, including the planned redesign of Lawrenceville Center Road, the joint project with NACA and Cleveland Heights of a multi-purpose path from Kane Park to Walter Stinson Community Park into the JCU campus, among others. Having a solid, superior, and reliable civil engineering firm working for the city promoted stability and progress in our long-term projects and has since 1978. The arrangement was beneficial and economical to the city. Weiss and Rock's intemperate and obstructive actions have not only ended the relationship, but destabilized these crucial projects. Joe Chuney served the city with distinction for over 30 years. I thank Joe Chuney for his service. I'm hopeful a qualified city engineering candidate and firm will present themselves in spite of the conduct of certain current council members. Unfortunately, Michelle Weiss and John Rock's damage to the city's relationship with our current engineers is permanent. It will make the city's recruitment of a new city engineer more difficult. The refusal or inability of Weiss and Rock to work with others has driven away an excellent city engineer and his firm. This is the latest example of certain council members and council leadership not working with others and undermining the progress of the city. And this I would add. It has been suggested that Mr. Chuney did not say on the record that he would resign as the city engineer if that position was changed. But he did, and it is reflected in the minutes of February 6, 2023, Page 12, second to last paragraph, Junie stated his intention to give notice. The response was by council was to delay the effective date to 12/31/23. Junie and GP are resigning effective that date. In the next few days, the city administration will issue an RFQ for a new city engineer. Thank you to Mr. Cheney and Mr. Pennington for their assistance in helping draft the RFQ. I now turn to the Waterstone Medical Building and its condition. The council and the public are generally aware of the rundown condition of the property. Even after a building fails inspection, the city tries to work with property owners who are actively working to bring their properties into compliance. The principal behind the ownership group of the Waterstone Medical Building, Ed Wasserstein, refused to move to the city. He wrote on his violation notice that we could take it to court and that he would fight. So Jeff Engelbrecht referred the matter to the city prosecutor, Mike Cicero, who brought a criminal complaint for the outstanding building code violations on behalf of the city. On August 9, 2023, Ned Wasserstein pled no contest and was convicted of all 122 counts of exterior property maintenance violations. The court fined him $122,000 in total, and Wasserstein faces up to 18 months in jail. The court suspended all fines and jail time upon the condition, the completion of 1 year of active probation, and fixing all items to the chief building official's satisfaction. And to that end, the court ordered Defendant Wasserstein and Chief Building Official Dennis Garcia to meet at the property on or before August 23, 2023, to establish a definitive list of items to be repaired and replaced with exacting requirements. That meeting was had, and we await Mr. Wasserstein's repair schedule, which he said he would have to us by today. The city administration takes public safety seriously. Regardless of any possible redevelopment of the current Waterstone site, which remains to be seen, whether it is a Chick-fil-A or something else, the city will not allow the property to remain in a code non-compliant state. I will not hesitate to ask our prosecutor to review this matter for a probation violation and the imposition of sentence if Mr. Wasserstein fails to take action to remedy all 122 violations and bring his building into full compliance. Speaking of building code violations, I will now address the elephant in the room. We are here at John Carroll University in the Donahue Auditorium at Dolan Science Center, and not the former Wiley School building, which has served as a meeting space for the city since 2021. On Monday, August 28th, the Wiley building failed inspection by our fire department on 7 of 8 state fire code items, and failed inspection by our building department on 18 state building code items. Following those inspections, the CHUH School District advised through a representative that the Wiley building was closed to all outside agencies until the building was made safe. Cleveland Heights University Heights School District employees and contractors, the City of University Heights employees, and the city's building department and chief building official worked all week last week to remedy conditions. On Friday morning, Wiley passed fire inspection, but again failed building inspection. I understand work continued over the weekend. I thank Safe Build for getting an inspector out yesterday, Labor Day, to conduct another re-inspection. While that inspector passed the building with a limited inspection, he did not have Mr. Garcia's inspection or re-inspection notes, and he did not issue an occupancy permit, deferring that to Chief Building Official Dennis Garcia. For the inspector from Safe Build, James Novak, the persons present for the Labor Day inspection were advised to follow Mr. Garcia and the building department this morning. Today, after no one contacted our building department to get an occupancy permit, Mr. Garcia endeavored to follow up with the parties. As of this afternoon, there is still no occupancy permit on the Wiley building. While I know of no particular reason why one should not be issued, one has not been issued. Notwithstanding this last point, I want to thank our fire department, who rose to the occasion, even as they were responding to the storm damage of Friday, August 25th. As that was also the first day, it was brought to the administration's attention that the school district had entered into an arrangement with Hebrew Academy of Cleveland to hold classes temporarily at the informal Wiley School for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Likewise, I thank our building department and the numerous employees of Safehold who made this a priority item all week, and indeed even on Labor Day, to inspect and re-inspect the work that was done by the school district and its contractors to bring the building up to code. I want to thank the Hebrew Academy parents who called me concerned their children were missing school last week over this issue, and for their understanding that the city is here to ensure that state code is followed, to assure the safety of some 300 Hebrew Academy school children and some 75 teachers, administration, and staff who would be using the Wiley building. And finally, I want to thank the numerous representatives of the CHUH School District and of Hebrew Academy of Cleveland for their efforts these last 12 days. Finally, with regard to the storm of Friday, August 25th, I sent the following message to all city employees on Monday, August 28th. Good morning. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone in the fire department, the police department, and the service department together with individuals in all departments who have contributed in any way to the emergency response since the severe storm in the first morning hours of Friday, September 25th, 2023. I said September in the email, but really it was August 25th, 2023. I especially want to recognize and thank our first responders who worked through the first morning hours, followed by our service department, who came in and then worked on into the night. Rising to the occasion as you did reminds us why we all went into public service. Here in University Heights, everyone part of this critical response exemplified that. Emergencies of this magnitude challenge us individually. They challenge our residents, dozens of whom were still without power. They challenge the systems we've created and are part of. In the upcoming days, with the situation fully resolved, we'll take stock of everything we did well, everything we can improve upon, and apply what we've learned. I would note now that the last 98 homes had power restored by Tuesday, August 29th. Hearing from residents since Friday, the acclaim for your response has been universal. I join them in gratitude and say thank you on behalf of all University Heights residents. Thank you. And thank you. This concludes my report. Next item is reports and communications from the City Council and the taking of action thereon. Mrs. Wax, give a report.
Yes, I do. First of all, I'd like to thank the City Council members who marched in the 11th Congressional District Parade yesterday. It was nice to have representation for our district and our city there. Finally, I do want to reply to the mayor's statement on GPD. I will do this for the third time publicly and just give a little history about this. There was a discussion about the professional service ordinance. A working group of lay leaders, Councilman Rock, myself, and the mayor, plus Mr. Chuney, met many, many times in a very respectful and collaborative manner to try and resolve engineering bidding, which has not historically taken place, and we wanted to do this without an ordinance. We were very close to the end of that working group with a successful policy and procedure. And what happened was, in a council meeting, the mayor all of a sudden presents a contract that our engineer is not an individual anymore, but they are a company. And he continued to say that the working group was a farce, which was an awful statement considering we had lay residents that were working extremely hard, as well as himself, council members, and the engineer. We then included Mr. Chuney in every single meeting for the professional service ordinance. And he agreed to every single piece and part of that professional service ordinance, and actually stated that he feels GPD would be very competitive in the bidding. And just to remind everybody, a project over $50,000 is extremely rare in University Heights. It comes every 3 to 5 years. So GPD would basically be receiving every single contract. I'm not sure what happened behind closed doors. No one was ever disrespectful. Mr. Rock apologized the one time when things got slightly heated in an open meeting. It was always respectful. It was always collaborative. And for the mayor to say this again, it just shows the divisiveness that he has put into this council, which does not have to happen. That is it.
Vice Mayor Weiss, can I,
Go ahead, Mr.
since I was named, since both Vice Mayor Weiss and I were both named, I'd like to respond to the mayor's comments towards the two of us. Nothing more than a stump speech, if you ask me. I read through Joe Chuney's letter of resignation, and nowhere in there does it say anything that you described. Nothing about what you described was factual, more of an opinion. You notate several key points here about disrespectful treatment. I believe all the meetings we have been respectful. It's unfortunate that you are usually the most disrespectful in these meetings as you name call, harass, threaten to vote certain ways. The rest of us remain very respectful. In the closed door meetings that we had with Mr. Chuney and residents, everybody gave their time. This was all done voluntarily. We took time off work to do this. Mr. Chuney was very appreciative of those efforts. In the committee meetings, Mr. Chuney mentioned he was going to retire, and as part of his retirement, he would ask that GPD go forward with submitting a statement of qualifications when we do an RFQ. But I saw nothing in the letter that substantiates your claims. It's unfortunate you used your time to do that. But I do want to notate that the ordinance changing engineering services from that of a provider to a manager, it's a little skewed because the contract we had with Mr. Chuney was that of a manager. He was the city engineer. He had a fee to do city engineering services. Anything above and beyond that, he submitted a proposal because it wasn't part of his scope. So when he wanted to provide engineering services, since it wasn't part of his scope, he submitted a proposal. We wanted to correct some of the behavior in which that were not aligned with the state of Ohio's laws. The state of Ohio is very clear that professional services over $50,000 must be done in a competitive and public manner. That had not been done. So our ordinance was to correct that. You notate a 45-year relationship with GPD, which we appreciate, but he had this relationship without ever competing for the work, without ever submitting a proposal in a competitive manner. I don't believe this puts our projects in jeopardy. There are dozens and dozens of engineers in the county, in which GPD is not in the county, but there are dozens of engineers within the county who can respond to our work. And then you mentioned an RFQ for engineering services. I look forward to that. We will, when that comes forward, I'll move that we move it to committee so that the subcommittee of facilities and infrastructure subcommittee can review the RFQ so that it aligns with our ordinance and so that it is fair and competitive for all engineers to compete for. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Rock. Are there any other reports? Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you. I just have an observation, question, perhaps rhetorical, but being here at John Carroll University is a breath of fresh air, literally. We have been at Wiley for, 3 of us down here, for a year and a half. It has been brought up several times that an alternate site would be appreciated. I believe the vice mayor invited administration to go and check out Belfair and John Carroll and maybe some other places, and he can report it back. We have frozen, we have boiled, we have seen what looked like maybe mold on the ceiling, things falling off, we switched sides because the sound didn't work, which actually poses an obstacle to public meetings. I mean, we can't, this isn't accessible, I don't know, maybe it is somehow to people with disabilities, but I know when the Zoom isn't working or the streaming isn't working, that's an obstacle. So I find it, I mean, this is the first I'm hearing of it in this public situation. I find it interesting at the very least, at the very best, the timing of this, you know, of the mayor's looking into why we, as a public health hazard. What about for our public? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Happy to offer some clarification. Was there another report? I would like to give everybody an opportunity to report. So if you have something, Ms. Moser, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were about to speak.
Oh, well,
But when you're done,
okay.
I'm happy to wait.
All right, thank you. Thank you. We'll do that. Okay. First, Mrs. Sachs' response. On Friday, August 25th, around 2 p.m. is when the school district requested that the city conduct inspections of the property. And we conducted those inspections the following Monday morning. So with regard to this facility, we're working with John Carroll, working with Belfair, and we did visit Belfair. The facilities, though nice, weren't really suited for what we were looking to do. At the time, John Carroll was not in a position to offer rooms. Made a personal plea to Dr. Mikiak following the closure of Wiley last week. Called him up, asked him, Al, can you help us out here for next week? Here we are. We talked that we might need to do something beyond that. It was uncertain at that time what was going to happen with regard to Wiley, whether the building was even going to be fixed, let alone ultimately pass inspection. We did not know at that time how long we would be out of the building. As it is, you know, tonight we don't have an occupancy permit in that building. And I mean, the school district does not have, there is none for the Wiley building. So I'm glad that we followed through with finding an alternate location and sticking with it. We will determine sometime between now and the next regular council meeting whether we will be in this room, a different room, back at Wiley, or somewhere else. As for what Mr. Rock brought up, 2 items. One, I am not taking the RFQ to the council committee for review. The hiring of the city engineer is within the province and discretion of the mayor. The mayor is going to be issuing the RFQ. We'll be interviewing and following the process consistent with the ordinance that's passed, and then bringing a recommended candidate to the city council sometime before the end of the year. Finally, Mr. Cheney emailed me following the memo I wrote. You know, there's been some dispute over the veracity of what I said. Mr. Cheney's own words on it were, "Thank you, Mayor. I was contemplating saying similar words at some point, but I could not have said it better than you just did." As we said in the meeting, we will assist you with the process to hire a new engineer, and I will always be available to you at the new engineering firm for continuity of service and to provide any institutional knowledge I have for whatever matter may arise. Ms. Weiser, you have the floor.
Little bit of history. Little bit of history. I've known Joe Chudy since 1995. And I think turning his retirement into a political football is demeaning for the man and for the work that he put out for the city. He did a lot. He was not perfect. None of us are. But what he did in good faith. He worked for the mayors of this city. He cut corners when we needed corners cut around 2005 and 2006, which is why only 10% of curbs were replaced when we did streets, residential streets, because we didn't have the money to do curbs and streets. So he did what we could do within our operating budgets. His dad was the engineer, Joe was the engineer. He joined GDP well into that 45-year period. GDP was not the city engineer for 45 years. The Chunings were the city engineer. And quite frankly, I haven't seen a resolution come out of the administration or from council thanking Joe for his service. And I would hope that at least on the council end, that we would prepare a resolution thanking Mr. Chuning for what he did for the city for the years that he has been here. I really, really, really feel very, very badly that Joe has been turned into something that I don't think he likes being. He has always been a gentleman and a gentleman.
Thank you, Ms. Weiser. Are there any other reports from council this evening? Very good. We will then go to reports and communications from the various directors. We'll start with the Department of Finance. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a finance committee meeting next week, so we hope to have everything closed for the month of August by then. We have some reports out probably by the end of this week with updated financial information for not only the council but the committee members. Just to give you a little snapshot of some unofficial numbers through the end of August, our net revenue in the general fund is $12.6 million. Our net expenses thus far are $11.1 million. So we continue the trend that we've had all year, collecting more money than we're spending. We did get our second half property tax collections over the summer. There are no further distributions coming from the county in that regard. So we're pretty much reliant over these last 4 or 5 months on income tax collections from the regional income tax agency. In terms of all funds, our net revenue for the year is $16.1 million, net expenses $14.1 million. So both in terms of measuring general fund and all funds, we're collecting more revenue thus far through the end of August, and we have expenses for that same time. There's a couple items on the agenda tonight. One is the first reading for approval of tax rate resolution. The council remembers they approved the tax budget. It was filed with the county in July. The process for that is then sent down to the county budget commission, and they review that to determine if the city has the need to assess property taxes. So they did send that resolution back to confirm the rates that we proposed. Those rates are consistent with what's been here for years. There was no property tax increase proposed for next year. So I just wanted to point that out. That would be on first reading tonight. There's an appropriation appropriation amendment on the agenda that covers some of the things that have been approved over the course of the year that were not contained in the original budget. We will have at least a final appropriation measure at the end of the year, if not one before that. We'd like to remind everybody that we did not budget anything for any kind of salary adjustments based on the outcome of the union discussions. So when that occurs, we'll have to amend the budget in that regard. And there's various special assessment ordinances on this evening. The one is for $4 million for University Square. I believe Mr. McConnell can address the specifics of that. The others are annual special assessment ordinances that apply to sewer operating, sewer capital, street lighting, and shade tree assessments. Similar to the property tax resolution, those are not changing from prior years, so there is no increase in the amount of assessments that are being requested for council to approve. Other than that, like I said, I can answer any questions, but I'll have more detail ready for the finance committee meeting that is scheduled, I believe, for a week from tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Any questions for Mr. Kennedy?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Ms. Weiser.
Mr. Kennedy, what percent collection on the property taxes? You know, I'm sure they made it.
What is the year-to-date collection?
Yeah,
percent?
percentage, what are we running, about 90,
It's huge.
85, 90?
It's about 92%. I'll have to check to see what, I can email you that number.
Would you please? Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Kennedy? All right, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next is the Director of Law, Luke McConnell.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, regarding the University Square bankruptcy litigation, there was a hearing originally scheduled for today that was to address several issues, including principally the proposed schedule for the litigation that would establish a date for auction and sale of the parcels in bankruptcy, or parcels under the purview of the trustee in bankruptcy. At the end of last week, the debtor, being the bondholders, filed a motion to continue that hearing to allow for additional negotiation with both Target and Macy's, in the hopes that through that negotiation they might cause Target and Macy's to agree to the schedule of events. The court granted that motion late on Friday, and the hearing has been rescheduled to next Tuesday, September 12th. So I anticipate having a substantive report for you in executive session at the next meeting relating to the status of the bankruptcy proceedings and what, if anything, was accomplished in those negotiations amongst the bondholders on the one hand, Target and Macy's on the other. In connection with the assessment ordinance that's in front of you this evening, this is what has become, unfortunately, the standard University Square assessment of $4 million. It is essentially the extent to which the payments in lieu of taxes, or the pilot payments, have been insufficient for purposes of servicing the bond debt that was issued under the TIF. This is the owner of the property's right, since they did not receive pilots to make this assessment as security. In this case, the bondholders are exercising the right in part to demonstrate to the bankruptcy court the need for the bankruptcy. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. McConville. Any questions for Mr. McConville? I just have one because I know the answer to it, but I think it would be helpful, for the public to hear those who wouldn't have access to bankruptcy billing. Before the motion continue, and with regard to the motion and the hearing that was set on the 5th, what did the schedule generally look like with regard to the sale of University Square? How long were we looking at?
Yeah, we were looking at the proposal that's been put before the court by the bondholders is very aggressive. We would call for both the auction and the sale to be completed before the end of the year.
Thank you. We turn now to public safety, police, Chief Rogers.
Mayor, no report.
And no report. Thank you, Chief Rogers. Fire, Chief Kirkland.
No report, Mayor.
And no report. Thank you. Service, Mr. Pennington.
Okay, just want to give everyone an update on what Service Department has been doing in regards to the storm cleanup process. You'll note that in many areas of the city, there are still large numbers of brush piles throughout the city. We are currently working overtime Saturdays, evenings, to try to address these piles. Overall in the city, we had over 180 large piles would require backhoe pickup with a dump truck, which amounts to over 4.5% of our entire house stock in the city. That does not include what we picked up with our standard garbage truck, brush truck throughout the city. In addition to that, in cooperation with the mayor, we did a food collection for spoiled food due to the power outage for residents. And we did a one day that actually turned into about a 3-day process of collecting food for residents. Right now we're continuing to work, and we'll work until we get the city back up and cleaned up from this storm event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pennington. And thank you to the Service Department and to our police and fire department for everything that all three departments did with respect to the storm response. Were there any questions, Mr. Pennington? Mrs. Sacks?
Thank you. I would just like to thank you and the service department for your commendable responsiveness in this very difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pennington. Housing and Community Development, Mr. Edelman.
Mayor, I had no report at this time.
Okay, no report, thank you. Communications and Civic Engagement, Mr. Cook.
Mayor, no report.
No report, thank you. Economic Development, Mrs. Struther.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I just want to give you a report on the businesses. We had quite a bit of activity in the summer, so I just want to give you a breakdown of some businesses and what has been happening. First is with Bialys on August 20th. They had a soft opening. As you recall, at the end of, before you took your break, they had leased the adjacent space next to them. They finally opened their sandwich shop. That is in addition to their Bialys business, so they are up and running. Green Road Liquor Store has also expanded their business into the adjacent space. That was the former Bar None. So that's 2181 and 2179 South Green Road. The Happy Buddha also expanded their business into the adjacent space. That would be at 2173 and 2171 South Green Road. Family Dollar at 13470 Cedar Road did a full interior renovation, and they had kind of like a quasi-grand reopening because they were temporarily closed, but they renovated the interior of their store. Love My Hair expanded her business to the adjacent space and has now opened a cosmetology school that supports her wig business. That's at 2259 and 2261 Warrensville Center Road. Clean Eating at 2263 Warrensville Center Road. They have all their permits. They've been inspected. It's closed out. They still have not given a date though when they're going to open, but everything now has been through building. They've been approved and everything's good to go. So if I get an official date, I will make you aware of that. The garage at 13485 Cedar Road. If you've been down that way, you see there's a fence around the property there. They are making some improvements to the parking lot, and they had fencing that was next to that adjacent neighbor. The fence was in poor condition, so they're going to be redoing the fence as well because you know, the neighbor has to live with that too, and it's fallen apart. So they are doing those improvements on the exterior of the building. They did have permits issued for building renovation. Those permits were issued though back in July of 22, which means they have now expired. So for any interior renovations, they are going to have to come back and resubmit to the Planning Commission before any of that work can be done. But right now they're just doing the exterior work. The Sauce that is located at 13888 Cedar Road, that has been temporarily closed due to some mechanical failures that they've had. So they have not given a date for any reopening at this point in time. And then the Canez Townhomes, the rough mechanicals have been completed. They're starting drywall, and once the drywall is in, they will be opening for hosting open houses for the to sell the properties, but they want to make sure all the drywall is complete. And then finally, Boston Market, and I'm sorry I didn't write the address down, but we all know Warrensville Center Road, right next to Whole Foods. They did close in August. That site, I will tell you, I probably get 2 calls a week on that site, so there is a lot of interest in that site. So we'll see what happens with that site going forward. And that's the summary of what happened during your break.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Drucker. Any questions for Mrs. Drucker? Mrs. Sacks? No. Go to Ms. Osborne.
Thank you. Thank you for that report. It's very heartening and hopeful that these businesses are expanding, and we wish them much success. Their success is all our success. Regarding the Canez Homes on Chamberlain, I drove by there. What is the timeline? Because it looks awkward.
It does. It does. But I mean, right now, like as I said, they'll build the units, and then as they sell them, they will build the remainder.
I wonder why they started on Wynn and not on Taylor.
I don't know.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're
It's
talking about,
setback
but
and
I mean, it could be because the ones on Taylor are the ones that are gonna have the rooftop that will look downtown, and so they might wanna be waiting for someone to actually buy that site, because those homes will, they might, you know, rather than build a spec there, they might want to leave that option open for
So that preceded my tenure on council, but I did attend the meetings. And I know that they stated pretty strongly, they're experts in this, they know, you know, so I am very curious what their time frame is, knowing what they know, when it will look more finished. Because I don't think it's gonna be such an easy, I hope it's an easy sell. I encourage members of council to drive by there if you haven't.
Sure. Yeah, I don't have a timeline for you at this point in time, but I do keep tabs and speaking with them, so if they have a timeline to share with me, by all means, I'll share it with you.
Looking forward to future successful reports.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm going against the
Well,
timeline.
Mr. Cooney, if you don't,
I'm sorry.
I'm going to recognize Ms. Weiser next, and then I'll get back to you.
I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Weiser. It's okay.
On the old Cedar Taylor garage, I've noticed they are going in and out. I don't know if they're just storing. Let me finish, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. The second thing is that fence, I do believe was there actually is part of an ordinance approving the property when Cedar Taylor started the renting trucks. I forget what brand. And the property owner next to them really made a big deal about the fence. So that fence is going to have to be up and staying. One other thing though, is there some way to notify the tenants that we have, and it's wonderful what you're doing, but to make them aware when they want to do renovations, they need to contact the building department. It took a complaint from a resident to me and Jackson, and then me working with both Jeff and Dennis, for them to discover that they were renovating Family Dollar and had pulled no permits, even though electrical was being worked on and a number of other things. So in these cases, since apparently, you know, people are sort of neglecting to do what they need to do, is there a way you could like pick out a reminder just to remind them to pull their permits?
Okay, so let's back up to the first comment. I too noticed activity in and out, and Jeff and I have already discussed that. There should not be any work going on in the interior of the Cedar Road garage. So that we've already talked about having an inspector going over there and making sure that they're aware that there's not supposed to be any work. Now they're allowed in and out. We just want to make sure there's not any work going on. The only thing should be happening is the fence and the parking lot for that. As far as Family Dollar, I don't control the permits. The businesses are well aware. I do business visitation every single year, in person, going around to all of our businesses. They're aware of what the rules are, and I'm shocked that a Family Dollar wouldn't have pulled that. That's something I would have to speak to the building department about, but businesses know, especially a Family Dollar that is a franchise, they know full well they need permits before they do any kind of work, especially electrical.
I agree. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that certainly proves there's a hole. When Family Dollar could move in a semi-trailer, refrigerated semi-trailer to run like for a full 48 hours while they were moving their coolers into it, in violation of the codes, where you cannot be doing that from 1:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. when you're within 75 foot of a residential area. They have outside storage areas, so there's a gap somewhere. And perhaps that needs, we'll probably address that in terms of the building meeting that will be held before the next council meeting. Those kinds of things I think can become problematic when those changes go in and we don't know anything, and then because permits haven't been pulled, we don't know what kind of work is being done in those buildings.
True.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cooney, I know you wanted to have the floor.
My comment up against for Kness Homes would be as soon as possible. Mr. Zimmerman.
Probably a good
Yes,
guess.
and I know I'm not trying to put words in their mouth, but that would be my personal thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Roth.
Going back to the Kness townhomes, do you know, did any units sell yet?
No.
Yeah, because I was looking online and I noticed they're selling these for $569,000 a piece, which I'm a market capitalist, so if they can get it, great. That's going to only help us out. But when they came to the Planning Commission and when they came to the Architecture Review Board, they sold, and then when they came to City Council for us to give them the land, they sold us on a plan that they were going to sell these at $300,000 a piece. So I have a little bit of a concern right now since they just doubled the price out of nowhere. And maybe that's the market, but maybe not because they haven't sold. But that's something I want to really take a look at now, because if they're going to go for $569 and we approved, for instance, the Architecture Review Board approved buildings that were going to be for $300,000. If they're going to be for $569, they should look like they're $569. Instead, they look like they're $300. So that's something that I want to really take close attention to, because the city owned the land. We gave it to them, or we sold it for, I think it was $1,000 per parcel, whatever it was. So could you just find out if that $569 is their true market price, or if they plan on honoring the $300 that they sold the city?
Well, I'm not going to speak for them. All I can say is that at the time they presented, which was before COVID, I know they were pricing it between $300 and $400. I don't think, even in the development agreement, we can control what they ask for as a price. That's their choice, because they have to sell it.
If they're not going to sell, then
sure,
it's just
we have a problem then.
Right. I think what they were going to do is build 4 at a time, and when they sell their 4, build the next 4. My concern is if the 4 don't sell because they're $569, they'll have that whole thing of land with 4 empty units. And what the Community Investment Corp wanted to do is turn this into 30 townhomes at a market rate.
Sure.
So if it's going to take longer than 24, 36 months to move these 30 units because of the price, that's something I think the city does have some control over. So let's circle back to that.
Well, and I'll tell you, so Councilwoman Weiss brought this up to me probably, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. And I did follow through with Kness, and they were saying at that time, supplies have gone up, all the cost of supply, they were having supply chain issues, but that's why they were increasing their prices because of how much building costs have increased. So I'm assuming it's going to be the same answer, but I'll ask them. I have no problem checking with them.
I know it's not done.
And I don't know what that market rate would be either for a townhouse like that. I don't know. I mean, I do know they have been successful in selling them. I don't know if they've had them priced that high though, that I've seen in some of their other locations, like in Tremont and, I can't think of the other.
That's why it stood out, because it was so high.
I will definitely check with them.
Thank you.
But I just don't know, and I have no problem asking, I just don't know, I don't know what we can do to control what they ask for, but you're right, when they proposed the project originally, it was between 300 and 400, and we even thought that was steep back then, so.
It's just, I want to make sure 30 townhomes get built.
Sure,
So they have to be in a market price
Absolutely.
that 30 townhomes could sell.
Exactly,
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mrs. Drucker? All right, thank you, Mrs.
Thank you.
We now turn to item 9, reading and disposition of ordinances, resolutions, motions, and consideration of agenda items. And the first item is item A, ordinance 2023-48, authorizing the mayor to enter into a managed services agreement with Starfish Computer Corporation, declaring an emergency. This is an emergency. Patrick Branahan is here from Starfish Computer Corporation. He is who Mr. McConville and I have been working with. Patrick, I don't know if you'd like to come down and to the podium and say a few words before we proceed. You are here, and I know that one of our reasons for having you here is to be able to answer any questions council may have with regard to the managed services agreement that we've negotiated. So, Mr. Branahan, you have the floor.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I don't have any specific questions for the council. I'm more here to answer any questions that the council might have. I know at the last meeting that we were in, we went through all the details of the plan that we have for the city of University Heights, and everybody was in agreement. And then after conversations with the mayor and Mr. McConville, as far as contract terms, we've come to agreement on all terms throughout the discussed agreement, and I'm just here to more answer questions, field questions any way possible.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Branahan. Does anybody have any questions for the representative at this time? Mrs. Holmes.
Yes, thank you. I know that, first of all, thank you for coming. We're excited this is finally coming to fruition for many years. I know that either Starfish purchased another company or they were purchased. Can you kind of just explain that a little bit and how you feel that will help us going further?
Sure. So on the 1st of June, I believe it became official, Starfish acquired another company called MSM Technologies. It was an asset purchase, so the MSM folks that were working at their organization came onto Starfish's staff. There were no adjustments or anything like that. We did not downsize, change any operations for their entire operation at all. So they are now part of the Starfish team. So from the perspective of service, it's additional engineers. I believe there are 6 total MSM employees that came over. Additional engineers to the Starfish computer team that are available as resources now to the city of University Heights. So there is no changes to business structure, nothing that would have altered anything that was in the agreement that we talked about or proposal that we put in front of the council.
Okay, very good, thank you. Mr. McConnell, do you want to go over any of the changes that were made? I know that these have been distributed at the request of one of our council members, so it's more just a matter of 10,000 little review.
Yeah, I'll try to summarize what I think the most substantive changes were. First, I think it's fair to say that with respect to the red line changes that the city submitted to Starfish, all of those red line changes were accepted. The most significant of those changes was first that the indemnification clauses were removed. As we previously stated, a municipal corporation can only provide indemnification to a third party if it appropriates funds for that purpose. So as a practical matter, cities in the state of Ohio take the position that they cannot indemnify. We explained that concept to Starfish and were successful in having all of the indemnification language removed from the contract. In addition to that, we negotiated the early termination fee without cause. That provision had originally called for payment of the total amount left due and owing under the contract. I believe we negotiated that down to a 6-month time frame, so that becomes a viable provision and an option if things are not going well. And then lastly, in terms of the biggest changes, we negotiated the renewal percentage for the cost of the contract down from 5% to, I believe it's 2.5%. There were several other substantive changes that we requested, many of them that related to time frames. So for example, I think there was a 5-day period of time that related to late charges accruing. The city did make payment. We extended that to a 10-day period, and there were other similar changes. That's the 10,000-foot view.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConnell, and thank you also, Starfish, for accommodating the requested changes that the city made. Are there any further questions? As people lean into it.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Hanron, for being here this evening. Thank you for your patience with our RFP process, the legal review, and for your time here this evening. I'm excited that we're finally moving forward with this project, getting a full-time service contract in, and moving forward with migrating our business, our systems to the cloud to make it more resilient. So with that, I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance 2023-48, authorizing the mayor to enter into a managed service agreement with Starfish Computer Corporation and declaring an emergency.
Okay, thank you. Mr. King's made a motion on emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Weiser. Any discussion on the motion?
Mayor.
Yes, Ms. Weiser.
First of all, I'd like to thank Starfish for working with the city. And I'd like to thank you, Mayor, for quickly getting to council the revisions that were made in the contract so we could clearly see it and review it before the meeting. I appreciated that. One question though, did anybody at all talk to the technology committee or let them know about the changes? I know our technology committee had done a tremendous amount of work in reviewing and preparing the RFQs, reviewing the proposals that came in and coming up with a recommendation for Starfish to begin with. And those committees are citizen committees, volunteer committees, and it's always nice to get back to them. I mean, it's not going to hold up the contract at all, but I'm wondering if you did.
Well, I know Mr. King, the first version of the agreement, I think I may have shared with you. I'm not recalling just now if I forwarded it on to other members of the committee. I know that after speaking with a couple of them, they felt like they had devoted a considerable amount of time to this. I believe that the managed services agreement reported with the recommendation, and that there wasn't necessarily anything more for them to consider at this juncture. But that said, certainly I do thank our Tech Advisory Commission for their diligent work on the RFQ process and the RFP process, and we'll certainly be following up with them to let them know that their work came to fruition with a contract I presume will be authorized for entry this evening. So, thank you, Ms. Weiser, and also thank you for your kind words regarding getting information to you as you request. Any further questions? Not, we have a motion and second on emergency, and that means we have to take two votes. The first is on the suspension of the rules, which we need to do for emergency. Saying this for the benefit of our intern here, who may not appreciate why we're taking two votes instead of one. So, welcome, Chloe. And we'll start with a motion on the with a suspension of rules. Mrs. Thomas will call the roll on that.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rod?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
And with a vote of more than 5 agreeing to a suspension, we can now proceed with a vote on the main motion. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rod?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
And with a vote of in excess of 5, this does pass on emergency unanimously. So thank you, and thank you, Pat. We look forward to working with you and Starfish for some time to come.
Excellent. And just to clarify, is it acceptable that we send over documents to the city via DocuSign for signature?
Yes, we will do that.
Excellent.
We do via DocuSign, so if that's your preferred method, we're happy to receive it.
Just an
Please
easier,
send it to me directly.
easier paper trail so everybody has a copy.
Yes.
And if it is acceptable to the council, I do not want to hit and run, but my wife gave birth yesterday, so I would love to get back to the hospital if it's okay with everybody here. So.
All involved are well. Mazel tov.
Everyone's good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next item is item B, motion approving emergency IT and support and service for Starfish Computer through September 5, 2023, and not to exceed $1,350.50. This is purely to bridge the gap because we were not able to hold a special meeting before the end of the month, though we don't anticipate any particular IT emergency, nor do I think we had one. We didn't want to be without coverage, so we do a full year for that 5-day gap through the day. And I would ask for a motion to approve. A motion by Mrs. Weiss, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. King. Any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
A very good motion carries, so that is approved as well. Thank you. Thank you, Pat. That's your family. Next is item C, resolution 2023-41, levying tax year 2023 special assessments in the amount of $4 million for the core retail parcel in the University Square Development Permit Parcel number 1021-01-001 and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. I know, Mr. McConville, you discussed this some in your report. Is there anything you would like to add with respect to this? I'll also then recognize Mr. Kennedy and Mr. McConville.
Again, just for purposes of the record, this assessment amount of $4 million represents the shortfall between the amount of payments in lieu of taxes or pilot payments that were received by the owner of the property, which also happens to be the bondholders, and the amount of indebtedness owed under the TIF. It's the owner's right to levy these assessments on an annual basis to the extent that there's any shortfall. Unfortunately, this has become a habit, and as I mentioned earlier, in this case, the bondholders have an additional purpose for levying this assessment, which is to further demonstrate to the bankruptcy court the need for the sale of the property. The mayor did receive correspondence from the bond trustee directing the city to levy these assessments, and the city is contractually bound to do so.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Mr. Kennedy, anything to add?
Just that this and all the other assessment ordinances, once they're approved, we will file with them on or before September 11th with the county.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Comments? Questions?
I'd like to make a motion on emergency.
Okay, we have a motion on emergency to approve the resolution by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Marshall. Any discussion? We'll take two votes. Mrs. Thomas on the suspension of the rules.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
And on the main motion.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Thank you. Next is item D, resolution 2023-42, levying tax year 2023 special assessments for the cost of constructing, maintaining, repairing, and cleaning of the sanitary sewer system within the city and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. Mr. Kennedy.
Yes, Mayor, it is, I indicated earlier, this is an annual ordinance. There's no change to the rates being assessed for either sewer operating costs or sewer capital, and it does incorporate all the agreed upon changes with John Carroll University based on the properties that they own. Again, this assessment, if approved, I'll send down a file of all the permanent parcels in the city with these rates in there, and then we file with the county on before September 11th.
Mr. Kennedy. Are there any questions for Mr. Kennedy? And if not, is there a motion to approve on emergency?
Mayor.
Okay. You know what, why don't we take the motion in a second and we'll recognize the discussion. So we'll take the motion on emergency by Ms. Marshall. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. King, and I'm going to ask for discussion and recognize Mr. Ron.
Yes, sorry, we're on
Item D, yes.
Lost my place. Mr. Kennedy, I remember when the, I remember the name of the committee, Equalization Board, that's what it was. When the Equalization Board ruled on all these parcels that are part of the John Carroll property. My question is, did anybody follow up to see if these particular parcels are still considered single-family homes for the purpose of renting or duplex, or have any of these particular parcels been reprogrammed for educational or administrative use?
Mr. Rock, I do check each parcel in accordance with the terms of whatever agreement applies, the extended agreement. You know, last year that I caught that there was a parcel on there that the school was sold. So we reinstituted the original base rates for that property as opposed to the lower rates that were containing the agreement. But I go through each parcel and also verify with the county on a separate list to make sure that those parcels are listed as being owned by Chatfield.
And for the use of, as a single-family home, not for academic purposes. The only reason I ask is because they're doing so much work. I'm sure offices have moved, or different functions have moved about throughout the campus. I just want to make sure we're following up that this is correct. Okay.
Yeah, I do follow up.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, will you have something?
Well, I was just going to essentially echo what Mr. Kennedy said and let council know that we have had recent conversations with John Carroll about use of various of their properties, and do have reason to believe that they're not hiding anything from us with respect to any of these parcels, and that the use reflected in the ordinance is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? And we'll take two votes. First one, suspension of the rules.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rott?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Then on the main motion.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rott?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Next is item E, resolution 2023-43, levying tax year 2023 special assessments for the cost of street lighting within the city on all designated properties served by streetlights at the rate of 80 cents per frontage foot and declaring an emergency. This is an emergency. Mr. Kennedy.
Again, Mayor, these will be filed on or before September 11th. There's no change in the amount of the assessment per frontage foot for this year as compared to prior years back to 2019. Other than that, that's all it is.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Are there any questions? Oh, there is a question. Mr. Brown.
Yes, this question is for Mr. Kennedy. For that particular fund, I remember in years past, there was more money going out of the fund than coming in through these special assessments. How is that fund? What's the solvency of that fund right now?
The fund, Mr. Rock, you are correct, has to be subsidized by transfers from the general fund. The 80 cents per front foot is not sufficient to cover the increases that have happened over the past 4 or 5 years with streetlights. We would have to take that under consideration next year, probably in late spring, to make sure the process could be adapted to accommodate changes to the whole process. But
Sure.
the fund is still operating.
There's still a positive balance in the fund. Okay, that's something I would like us to look at in our finance committee. I don't want to see a change in taxes for anybody, so if perhaps we were to make an adjustment to a different fund, like for instance, the shade tree fund, since that is priced at a linear foot, so it is the street lighting, perhaps we could look at ways to offset some of that so we don't get into a solvency issue on that fund. And then furthermore, is there any way, because we're subsidizing this fund, there's more going out than is coming in through our assessments, is there any way that we can lobby First Energy to replace our lighting with LED lighting, something more economically, something more efficient, something that's more sustainable, but so that we could continue to use these assessments at 80 cents per foot, since the cost of the lighting out exceeds that. Is there something that we can do?
I will probably be bringing an agreement with NOPEC to council for the next meeting to have, as you know, there's been a lot of turmoil in the utilities industry, and we're hoping that we can get a rate from NOPEC that'll eliminate some of the increases that have been passed on to us through First Energy. As far as the LED lighting, that I would say we have to probably have to get a consultant to come in and take a look at that. And I do know there's a lot of possibilities in terms of grants for those, particularly anything to do with energy, and that would be something that we probably have to commission somebody to do a little help on, but probably worth the time.
I would like that. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve on, oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Weiss,
Yeah, thank you. I remember, I'm not sure if the service director knows this, but when there were lights out on my street, and I spoke to the service director, he said, I guess it was First Energy or a main company, are the only ones that actually can replace them. So I'm wondering if maybe the administration can, can start that process and maybe just ask that question, are there plans on changing everything out to LEDs, or is it only one that goes out?
Yes, currently, our arrangement with First Energy is LED upgrade when a light requires replacement, as the street lights as they currently exist are no longer manufactured. So there is a gradual changeover when those lights require repair and replacement. There is an agreement the city did sign some time ago with respect to that. But as far as any kind of replacement program beyond the spot replacement, that would require further exploration.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
This, it occurs to me that we did enter into an MOU with, I think the acronym is PCFO, Power Clean Future Ohio. This may be a topic to bring up with them to see if they can find grant funding for the city to reduce our energy costs.
Very good. Thank you for the suggestions. Yes, Mr. King.
I just wanted to comment on PCFO. I did ask them about that last year, and they gave us some initial what other communities have done. I agree that that's something that we should revisit with PCFO.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. King. Is there a motion to approve this resolution on emergency?
So moved on emergency.
Very good. Motion by Mrs. Weiss on emergency, second by Mr. Roth. Any further discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the suspension of rules?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
No, the main motion.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Next is item F, resolution 2023-44, levying tax year 2023 special assessments for the cost of planting, maintaining, trimming, and removing shade trees at the rate of 70 cents per frontage foot and declaring an emergency. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, there's no change to the prior year special assessment rate. 70 cents per frontage foot. And this will be also filed for September 11th.
Okay, very good, thank you. Is there any discussion? If not, is there a motion to adopt an emergency?
So moved on emergency.
Okay, motion to adopt an emergency by Mr. King, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Cooney, any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on suspension of the rules?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser? Sorry. Ms. Weiser?
Oh, aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Then on the main motion.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Next is item G, resolution 2023-45, levying special assessments for providing city services in the removal of nuisance conditions, lawn care, at various locations throughout the city of University Heights, and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. This ordinance applies to unpaid fees that residents and businesses have been billed for in the city of University Heights. According to the Ohio Revised Code, if we provide notice of this in advance of the filing of the assessments, anybody who's delinquent in paying any of the charges that were assessed for either grass cutting, brush removal, general maintenance, or any additional penalties that were assessed. If folks can pay this before the filing of the county, we'll remove them from the list. Otherwise, we do have the authority to place this on property tax bills for next year to collect in the amounts that were included and yeah, there's formatted a little differently because it was altered so landscape. But the list is attached. I will keep that list up to date before we send it down to the county, and even if I get a couple in after the fact, I will get the county to remove any assessments on there. So these are all violations as noted by the housing department and their internal processes. And we send out the bills and keep track of payments.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Are there any questions for Mr. Kennedy? And if not, is there a... Very good. Who's one?
I was going to ask the housing director this, but apparently he's left. I noticed there are a number of fines that are totaling over 1,000 K, and we seem to link up with houses or properties that are owned as like rentals because they're owned by LLCs or whatever. Is this common? Is this what we're seeing? That they tend not to pay?
I mean, I think both the experience here and with Cuyahoga County, that particularly LLCs and maybe out-of-state property owners pay less attention to not only nuisance abatements, but probably property tax payments as well. But I think as far as the specifics, I have to defer to Mr. Engelbrecht in terms of records of history and this.
I can send an email and follow up on it. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve this resolution on emergency?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Weiser. Is there a second? I'll take the second from Ms. Marshall. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on suspension of the rules.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
And then on the main motion.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Thank you. Next is item H, resolution 2023-46, adopting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county fiscal officer. This is on first reading. Mr. Kennedy.
Yes, Mayor, I referenced this in earlier remarks. This is based on the tax budget the council approved in late June. It was filed with the county in July. Proposed property tax rate is 9.15 mils. That's a combination, I'm sorry, it's 13.15 mils. Inside millage is 4.05. Outside millage is 9.15. It's 13.2 mils total. There is no increase in these proposed rates to prior years. As I also mentioned, we shifted some things last year upon payment of the bond. We needed less money to go to debt service. We put more money into pension funds. And there was an appropriation adjustment, I believe, on the next item. That basically, the net result of that will be collect more money for pension payments and thereby reduce the impact on the general fund expenses. But this is on first reading, and again, it's based on the approved rates that were contained in the city tax budget filed for the county budget commission.
Very good, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. This is just on first reading. You don't need this on emergency, do you?
No, sir, we can file it prior to the end of the month.
Okay, very good. All right, any questions for Mr. Kennedy or comments on this item?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Weiser.
Back in the 1970s, I thought we passed an ordinance that dedicated funding to, or it was millage, I think, that dedicated money to paramedic training. Is that still in effect, or is that somehow disappeared into the woodwork?
I would have to look into that, Ms. Weiser. I'm not familiar with that. It's not been on any of the city's books for some time.
It's in the 70s, because I actually had to look it up once.
I was only 10.
If you would, we can talk about it. Thank you. I was just wondering if you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this item? All right, if there are none, we will consider this first reading to be had, and we will then start to see it at the next regular council meeting. Next item is item I, ordinance 2023-47, amending ordinances 2022-69, authorizing permanent appropriations, current and other expenditures of the City of University Heights, Ohio for the period commencing January 1, 2023, and ending December 31, 2023, and declaring an emergency. This is on first reading. Well, no, this is on first reading and on emergency. So, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, this was referenced earlier. These are for adjustments necessary for things that have come up since the passage of the budget last year. If you remember, we passed it prior to the end of 2022, and to provide for some things that have occurred since then. And I can run through, if you'd like me to run through the individual items, I'd be happy to do so. There's an increase in the general fund for $8,332 to support the expenses for the county health department. At the time we did the budget last year, was using the estimates of 2022 rates. So this $8,332 represents the amount that contract increased this year. For the recreation fund, an increased total of $27,602.10. That's to include the additional funding that was appropriated for Juneteenth and for the $4,444 grant that we received for Fall Fest. So while the grant is revenue, we have to increase the appropriation to have the ability to spend it. Civil Service Commission, we need an increase of $11,000 to support payment of testing and evaluation fees for Safety Forces new hire and promotion process. Our budget this year did not contemplate those fees. There's been some things that have been accelerated due to the replacement of some departures and early retirements that have either taken place or will take place prior to the end of the year. We need approximately $80,000 to fund fuel costs for the remainder of 2023. The Cleveland Heights University High School submitted an invoice to us that will deplete the original budget estimate for fuel this year, estimating a little higher than what would be required. But I also want to pay all the bills this year and not carry in next year any bills that come in November and December. So this appropriation will allow me to encumber that money and start out the year fresh next year. For transfers, I will need an increase of $2,662.51. If you remember the opioid distribution fund that was created last year or 2022, we received our first installment as a result of those settlement funds in 2021. I had a temporary holding account in the general fund for this. So what I'd like to do is have an appropriation to transfer this money into that new fund that we set up last year. That's Fund 255. Sewer and Water Maintenance Fund, Fund 201. We need an appropriation increase of $565,000. Fund expenses related to the Cleveland Water Department for project for Saybrook. If you remember, this was approved by council. Mr. Schooling brought it up, I believe, in July. Cleveland Water will prepay us this money, this cash, to support the project. We did not include any appropriation in the original budget because we weren't sure if the project was going to take place this year or not. Once the project's completed, we conduct the reconciliation and we either send back any unused funds to Cleveland Water or they will cover us for the additional expenses if authorized. There's the next two are both increases in $60,000 for the police pension fund and the fire pension fund. That's to the additional monies that we received in the second half collections from the county. Again, the basis of this is to spend the money as it's given to us by the county, which will then lower the amount that we have to spend traditionally out of the general fund. So this appropriation increase will allow us to spend the cash that was collected. The next adjustment is a reduction. We had originally had an appropriation, I believe, of $420,000 in the TIP fund. We normally collect between the first and second half collections amounts somewhere in that vicinity between $350,000 and $400,000. However, we only received $5,700 and some odd dollars in the second half collection for the TIP because of a Board of Revision claim that was approved by the Cleveland Heights University High School Board and submitted by Targets. That was a settlement of their appeal. So that took a big chunk of our money. So I have to reduce the appropriation since we will not have the cash to spend that this year. And then the last item is an appropriation of $166,924.89 in the ARPA fund. These are leftover monies from the ARPA distributions that we received. Council had originally agreed to an increase in the amount that was originally budgeted for the 2023 street improvement program. So this amount will help offset that increase. I believe we had about $540,000 originally budgeted, and the revised street improvement program was north of $700,000. So this will, we did not appropriate any monies in the ARPA fund at the beginning of the year, so this appropriation will help offset those expenses. The new total budget with approval of all these requested appropriation adjustments to be $23,117,787.50. That's for all funds. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Are there any questions for Mr. Kennedy? And if not, is there a motion to approve on emergency? motion by Ms. Marshall, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Sacks. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll take two votes. The first is on the suspension of the rules. Mrs. Thomas?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rod?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall? Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
And then on the main motion.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Rod?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall? Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for your diligent work on this. Next is item J, motion to approve the 2023 road program change order for CA Agresta Construction regarding the August 24, 2023 tree storm damage on Ashers Road for an amount not to exceed $8,000. There's a memo in the packet from Mr. Cheney that Mr. Pennington will come to the podium. Mr. Pennington?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of council, in your packet is a memo from Joe Chudy, as well as a price quote for from Agresta for the addition of work in relation to some storm damage that occurred at 2567 Ashurst. This address is where a tree fell on the house there and created some damage. The uprooting of the tree did damage to both the curbing, street, tree lawn, and sidewalk at this location. And we looked at a way to best address the situation and repair the damages, looking either to our emergency contractor, Neroni, who had a $4,000 mobilization charge in addition to whatever work they did, or having Agresta already on site, working on that street, having them come in and provide us a quote. The items you see in the quote come to approximately $6,054 with the sidewalk slab there. Now, there could be other items that we don't know that aren't seen at this time, and that's why we were asking for the $8,000 at this time to cover any additional expenses that may arise from this repair.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Pennington. Are there any questions for Mr. Pennington? Mr. Rowe.
I just have a question. I don't have the original bid in front of me, but was there a line item for contingencies in the original bid that this could be absorbed in?
There is a line item for contingencies. However, the amount of contingency left did not cover the $8,000.
Oh, so there were already contingencies used?
Yes, it's my understanding.
Elaborate on what those were for?
I really can't. Mr. Chudy was dealing with the project from a management standpoint, so I don't have the exact list of items that he ran into.
Okay, that's fine. But this isn't the first change order that you're confirming. This is.
They have not done a final change order on the job to adjust quantities for the overall final project costs.
But what I'm asking is, since there were contingencies used, there were changes made either in the field, either by owner requested changes or unforeseen conditions that had happened. You're confirming that this is not the first change, correct?
It's not the first additional work that occurred.
That's what I wanted to know.
But it's not, nothing has been done as far as a change order yet, as those are typically done at the end of the project as a final adjustment to quantities.
Okay, but the contingencies ran out.
Yeah, it will. We had about, I think, $3,000 left in contingency at that time.
I think it probably bears repeating as well that this is an item related to a significant event from the storm that happened on the street where Agresta just already happened to be. If Agresta wasn't already doing the resurfacing project on Ashurst Road, we would have to mobilize somebody to bring them out there to do this repair work. This was a substantial old growth tree that went down and did considerable damage. So it's certainly a more cost-effective thing to do a change order with a construction group that's already there on the street versus bringing in somebody else.
Correct. It also would have potentially impacted the construction completion for Agresta, and could have, in theory, created damages in relation to delays.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Pennington? If not, is there a motion to approve this change order?
Mayor, Mayor, I'll make the motion to approve the change order not to exceed $8,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rock. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mayor.
Second by Mr. King. Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thomas, do you call the roll?
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rod?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. King. Next is item K, ordinance 2023-50, approving the renewal of the jail contract with Solon Police Department. Chief Rogers, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. This item was specifically discussed at the Safety Committee meeting prior to the council meeting tonight. Essentially, the new agreement extends the Solon Jail contract an additional 3 years at an annual rate of $88,800, which is the same base price that's been in place for the past 4 years. Also, the agreement would require the city to appropriate $110,000 for the Solon Jail services. For the past 6 years, Solon Jail has provided an effective, efficient, professional, and just service to the city while fulfilling our prisoner housing needs. And I would respectfully request authorization and approval for the city to enter into this agreement.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, Chief. Any discussion or questions for Chief Rogers? I know we just had a safety committee meeting on this, so those items have probably been exhausted. And if not, or if they have, well then I would entertain a motion to approve the ordinance on emergency.
I'd like to move on emergency, accept this motion, to accept this contract.
Okay.
I would just note, the ordinance itself contains the clause and declaring an emergency, and also does contain the specific emergency paragraph where we specify that language. So the agenda title is not accurate, but the ordinance is on emergency.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. McConnell. So, I'm sorry, did somebody make a motion? Mrs. Sacks made a motion. Are you making the motion on emergency?
I would like to, I'd like to make a motion on emergency for ordinance 2023-50, approving the renewal of the jail contract with the Solon Police Department.
Very good, thank you, Mrs. Sacks. Motion on emergency by Mrs. Sacks. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Marshall. Any discussion? All right, Mrs. Thomas, please call the roll on the suspension of the rules.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rod?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
Then on the main motion.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Rod?
Aye.
Ms. Marshall?
Aye.
Ms. Weiser?
Aye.
A very good, motion carries. Next is item L, ordinance 2023-49, accepting a proposal from SCS Engineers for consulting services to develop a plan for implementation of loose recycling for $28,500 and authorizing the mayor to enter into the contract on the terms and conditions set forth in a certain proposal and declaring an emergency. We have in the packet a revised proposal dated August 18, 2023. This is a subsequent revision. We've had a couple since the initial proposal from, I believe it was March 28, 2023, presented at the first council meeting in April. I do think that it bears going over, for the sake of the record, how we got, to this point, for the benefit of folks who have been on the council through all this. Back in 2019, the city engaged GT Environmental to do a solid waste study to update a previous study that had been done approximately 10 years prior with regard to waste collection here in the city of University Heights. There were numerous recommendations that were made, analysis of costs, analysis of the need to improve our recycling, several things. The bottom line recommendation was a recommendation to convert to curbside automated for rubbish and recycling pickup. There was a draft report in July of 2019. There was, after some change orders and some discussion about paying those change orders, there was a final report issued in May of 2020. The total amount paid to GT Environmental for the 2019 and 2020 work, $17,153.75. Since that time, we have been in an extended discussion about whether to implement the recommendations of the solid waste consultant reflecting nationally recognized best practices, or to do something else. We engaged in a pair of surveys in 2022. One was paid for by the Solid Waste District, Howard County Solid Waste District, at no cost to the city. That was conducted by RRS, industry professionals, with regard to the collection, with regard to solid waste and recycling collection. Another was paid for by the city's CIC and reimbursed. CIC is then reimbursed by the city council, and that particular survey cost $8,960.41. CIC funded that money, and eventually the city council reimbursed the CIC for that. We'll skip over a lot of the details regarding the propriety of that because I don't think it benefits this particular discussion. But in that time, since that time, we've observed numerous changes, within our own community with regard to the cost of recycling pickup. 2020, September 2020, the City Council did adopt a recycling, a bid on recycling from Kimball. At that time, the cost of recycling at that time was $96 a ton, with certain escalators contained therein. It was controversial, not everybody voted for it, but it did pass ultimately. It didn't pass on emergency, but it did pass with a bare number of 4. So there was a period of time in October of 2020 when the city had no recycling program, as we had no contract in place for the processing of recyclables. Nevertheless, there is a commitment by enough of the elected officials in the city to proceed at that time with continuing a program rather than ending a program, and for that I'm appreciative for all those who voted in favor of that time. Since then, I was reelected. I sought to engage in a compromised position with regard to collection. It is essential, and I think it needs to be reminded, and this is enshrined in part in 2023-05, the ordinance that this particular proposal is to help us implement, that it is necessary that we convert from bagged recycling pickup to loose recycling pickup. There is currently just one MRF that processes bagged recyclables. Every bag is thrown away in that process. Those bags themselves, one-time use plastic bags, represent a contaminant in the recycling stream. And most of the other modern MRFs, material recovery facilities is what MRF stands for. The other MRFs do not process plastic bag recyclables at this point. Going with Kimball means some other limitations. The glass that is collected and sent to Kimball, though we refer to it as being recycled, is not actually recycled. It is reused, crumbled, and turned into aggregate for pavement. For people who would prefer to see the glass, which is infinitely recyclable, actually be recycled, keeping the Kimball program is not consistent with wanting to see glass recycled in the city of University Heights. A couple of years ago, we did send out some recycling magnets going over what the core items are for collection for recycling in University Heights. There were 5 core items listed. I have one of the magnets here. I've crossed out on the top an item that Kimball no longer recycles. Cartons such as milk cartons, half-and-half cartons, buy soup that comes in a carton, if you buy broth that comes in a box, a carton, these items used to be recyclable in University Heights. They are no longer recyclable in University Heights, not as long as Kimball handles our recycling. Now, in Cleveland Heights adopted a recycling program based upon, and a collection program based upon recommendations by GT Environmental. They hired the same consultant that the City of University Heights hired. In fact, they hired that consultant after I recommended to their city manager how great a job their consultant did for the City of University Heights with regard to this report and its recommendations. In Cleveland Heights, they have 9 core items that they can recycle because they have loose recycling that is picked up curbside and sent to waste management. Waste management also pays Cleveland Heights for their recyclables. Beginning October 1st, we're going to pay over $105 a ton to have our recyclables processed. Under Kimball's arrangement, there is a lower rate if we provide loose recyclables, but there is also the possibility of eventually signing on to an agreement like the one with Waste Management, where we can expand the number of recyclables that can be collected and deliver them to Waste Management without the plastic bags, and recycle things like milk cartons, recycle things like yogurt containers, and cottage cheese containers, and sour cream containers. There are a number of plastics that are recyclable, collected for recycling in communities like Cleveland Heights that are not collected here and will not be recycled here, and in fact are a contaminant here using film. So that all said, you know, a movement towards loose collection pickup is called for. Technically, Ordinance 2023-05 does seek to do that. That ordinance was passed on emergency this past February by a 5-2 vote. 2 of the people that opposed, 2 of the council members that opposed it are still here on this council. 2 of the 5 members that passed it on emergency are no longer on this council. And though the ordinance calls for the collection of loose recyclables, it goes an additional step, unlike any other community I've seen, where it mandates that the collection of those loose recyclables is to be done in the backyard. Now, there are only 2 other communities on the east side of Cleveland that still have backyard collection. Neither of them have an ordinance that mandates it. It's done by local custom, it's done by administrative custom, and it's supported by their city councils by ensuring that there is money and resources appropriated for performing the collection in that way. That said, we have an ordinance now that mandates an outcome, loose collection of loose recyclables in the backyard, but without any plan to actually implement that. So while I did not veto or sign Ordinance 2023-05, I nevertheless viewed it as my duty to seek out assistance in determining a plan for how to implement this particular ordinance, because there was no plan in place, no plan proposed, no funding actually provided, no appropriations done to do any of this work. It was the opinion of Mr. Corney, I understand it's also the opinion of Mr. Pennington, that additional equipment and labor is going to be necessary to implement this ordinance. Because it is such a unique ordinance, you know, we're not seeking, you know, outside consultants to help provide us what is generally an off-the-rack solution with regard to implementing a national best practice of collection, which would be, you know, curbside automated. We are seeking to have something very unique done here, and thus we sought the assistance of SCS engineers, Stacy Demarest, Tony Puccio, and they have made a proposal. Their initial proposal was less. There were some things that were added, some additional items, requests for things to be done that were added at the committee level. I, for one, you know, am very hopeful that we will have loose recycling collections soon. I know that in Cleveland Heights, once they had their curbside automated recycling collection program in place, fully in place. Fourth quarter of 2022, the first quarter in Cleveland Heights, when they had this program in place, their recycling increased by 70%. And we can have that kind of result here if we're willing to do what it takes to pick up loose recyclables appropriately, and if we're ultimately able to switch to a MRF who will accept our loose recyclables that take the 9 items that Cleveland Heights is able to put out versus the 4, 5, or 6 that we have, depending on what you count. Per the magnet, it's only 4 items. 1 item was split on subsequent publication by the Solid Waste District. Paper and boxes being counted as 2 items instead of just 1 on here. And then the addition of aluminum cups, which for the those of us who would buy and use aluminum cups instead of plastic Solo cups. I've seen very few of these in the wild, but if you happen to have them, they are recyclable with Kimball and here at University Heights. If you have some of those aluminum cups, single-use aluminum cups, you may put that into your recycling here. So what we have is a proposal to spend $28,500 to seek assistance from SCS engineers to help us implement Ordinance 2023-05. I first brought this to the council at the April 3rd or 4th meeting, whichever that first meeting of April was, approximately 1 month after the ordinance was passed. So if we're going to follow through, if it is the council's desire still to follow through the implementation of this ordinance, then we're going to need assistance, and that is, the August 18 letter, which is in our packet. If on the other hand, in light of the other recommendations we've had, the other consultant work that we've had, and in light of the great results that Cleveland Heights has had with their program, if we want to go back to something more like what Cleveland Heights was doing, then perhaps this is not something that we want to turn. At this time, we've had, a change in composition of council since the last time this issue was taken up. There may be different opinions on this. $28,500, after we've spent, $17,000 with GT, another $9,000 on a survey, the $10,000 that was spent on our behalf to do, to do loose recycling in the backyard. So I brought this to you for your consideration. If we're going to pursue this course, then this is necessary. If you feel differently about pursuing this course, then this is not. But if we don't pursue this, then the ordinance is on the books, but like Earl Rothschild's gun control ordinance from the 70s, it's on the books, but it's not being enforced. So choice is yours, and I'm happy to yield the floor to whoever has anything they'd like to ask or say about the subject of this story. Thank you. Oh, this is Dennis.
Thank you. So I too would like to go over the history of this ordinance. Yes, that GT Environmental 2020 study was done, $17,000. It was not conclusive of curbside automated collection. After all, the second recommendation out of 7, right behind education and awareness, was customer service. And it emphasized in order, and I spoke to Jim Scora, who composed and carried through the study, that it was a priority order of recommendations. And it was necessary to do customer service to ask our residents through survey what method they would prefer, how they would like the trash to be collected. Continue in the backyard or side door, or alternatively at the curb. 2 surveys were sent. Each one came up with 3 items that were preferred by most of our residents. Number 1 was to improve recycling.
Number one was to maintain backyard collection, side door backyard, I'm going to use that interchangeably. So that was number one. Number two was improving recycling, and number three was to maintain the service staffing levels. With that information, we had a Service and Utilities Committee meeting on January 4th. All of the items in Ordinance 2023-05 were approved unanimously based on what the residents want. We serve the residents. There is a way to achieve all of those things. As far as the ordinance not having a planning component, Council has been accused on numerous occasions of overstepping its bounds into the executive branch of government by doing such things as planning. Planning is up to the administration to be able to implement the ordinances. Council's job is two things: to legislate, to appropriate. Then it's up to administration to execute. So my professional career is in planning and implementation of new programs. Is it something I could present? Absolutely, but it's not. It would be inappropriate. As far as, and I've brought this up before, and I'll bring it up again, the word curbside refers to residential property. It refers to the preferred method of achieving improved outcomes of recycling, that the city will go to the residential property to collect the recycling materials, as opposed to a recycling desert, which are municipalities that do not have such a service. And in order for those residents to recycle materials, they have to go to a different location, whether it's a different location in their city, outside of their city, regional, whatever. So when we say curbside, we say backyard, if we're using it correctly, it just means on the residential property. So collecting the trash, the rubbish, the recycling at the backyard for a side door is actually a preferred or premium method. I've spoken to people at all levels. Several municipalities of our 59 in Cuyahoga County I've visited. I've spoken on the phone, I've emailed. The solid waste district of the county, which, by the way, you can compare on your own. And I'm glad to bring this analysis, and I wish somebody would, perhaps that's investigative reporting that can be looked into. But when you compare 2020, 2021, 2022 annual reports, you will not see a substantial, you will see mostly either the same or worse recycling rates, not of the yard waste, but of the percent of recycled materials in most of the municipalities. So the case still needs to be made for, is automated curbside or curbside, is that really improving the recycling rate? And I'm saying the data does not support it, and I would love for somebody to present that to me, otherwise at any level. But that's regardless, because we are going to move forward with what the residents want, and we can do it. It is being done by our neighbors who have comparable, those that collect in the backyard have comparable recycling rates. One is bagged, one is not. We prefer to go to loose because that is supported by the data. That is superior. That is, in so many ways, the way to go. But their recycling rates are comparable. Some years a little better than others, but I think it was in 2020, only one municipality achieved the solid waste district's goal of 25% recycling. The rest did not. As far as hearing the mayor give us an update on what's recyclable. I find it fascinating that this is the first time I'm hearing about it, or reading about it. Maybe it was a Mosaic, I missed it, maybe it was in a Friday wrap-up, or even at a council meeting, but I think I've pretty much read and attended all, and I have not seen